So I got really emotionally connected before anything physical happened. So when people tell me they had an emotional affair, unless one was in California and one was in New Jersey, I think they're lying. Because
I definitely understand that sentiment.
I just don't see how when the emotional connection gets that strong, it's not going to turn physical.
Welcome to Curious Christianity. Today's topic is a serious one. It is one who has affected me and millions of believers all across the world. Think about these names: Carl Lentz, Mike Bickle, Ted Haggard, Ravi Zacharias. These are all men who have fallen from ministry and in a very real way hurt the lives of millions of people across the country. And this is a subject that has impacted me in many ways, not just because some of those guys have impacted me, but because it has happened in the churches that I've attended. And so today with me, I have one of my pastors from my youth. And it is very interesting to be in this close proximity because this is the first time that I've gotten to openly talk with one of my own pastors about this topic and somebody who's greatly impacted my life. So, welcome to the channel, Scott Ranck.
It's good to be here with you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Scott. It's amazing because it's been so many years. Yeah, 20 years ago that I attended your church in Virginia. And it's so surreal in some ways to be a little bit more of an adult and speak with the pastors that you looked up to on stage.
Yeah, and now we're just peers, regular guys.
So what are you doing now, and how does this subject impact you?
Wow. Let's probably back up a little and tell the story so they know what's going on. In 1992, I became the lead pastor at a church in Chesapeake, Virginia. And I was a young guy, 39 years old at the time. And the church was a traditional Baptist church at the time. And when they called me to be their pastor, they said, "We want you to build this church to reach our grandchildren." And this was really early in the contemporary church movement. We had one other church in Chesapeake that was attempting to do church differently. And I already had kind of a vision. I had written down on a paper all the changes I'd like to make over time. And I knew it was going to be a slow process, kind of like turning an aircraft carrier. And man, the church just started growing. Young families coming in by the bucket loads. There was one year in there, probably 4 or 5 years in, we baptized 90 people that came to know Christ, through the church. And we did a couple different building projects. And all the while, I would say I didn't know anything at all about emotional health. I had read my Bible. I did great in Bible college, preparing for ministry. But when I graduated, first in my class, my down deep thought was the wheels could come off at any time. I didn't feel like I was really prepared. I could preach. I really didn't know much about leading the church. And I knew very, very little about emotional well-being. And so as we started making changes, one big one I remember is when we sold our piano and organ and moved a praise team in. and we had a drum set. Probably 20 people left the church that Sunday. And on their way out, they all gave me down the road. I had people tell me I was the Antichrist. People tell me when they left the church, it would go under in 6 months. You know, all kinds of stuff. And man, I was a people person. I didn't know it at the time, but I was an affirmation junkie. You know, I liked the stage and the spotlight, and I like being the center of attention. And everyone that left really hurt me. I would see people at the mall on a Friday night that left the church, and I felt like I was their pastor still, and I'd wave at them, and I had people turn their head the other way and keep going. So all that stuff kind of, I think, helped set me up for the failure. At the time, all I had ever heard was, I heard Billy Graham's rules. Are you familiar with them? You know, you
Yes,
don't
I
get.
am.
So I had all those rules in place. In fact, when I hired the person I ended up messing up with, I told her, if it's a rainy night and your car won't start, I will not drive you home alone.
Now, like I want to be a little bit specific
Yeah, you can
because
do
right
whatever
right
you want.
now,
Yeah.
right now we have had this plethora of pastors who are getting out of ministry. They're being brought out of ministry, taken out of ministry. And one of the aspects that I don't appreciate, and there's a bigger discussion that could be had about it, is the ambiguity of it. So are you saying that you had an affair?
Yeah, absolutely. I committed
See, that's,
adultery.
yeah. And that I think is just important to some degree, because today I'm hearing different letters as like, oh, it was sexual misconduct. And I'm like, what does that mean? You know, I'm like, what do you mean when you say this or that? And yeah, I want to be clear
I
about
think
it to
that's
some degree.
hugely significant because when you get up before a church, and I'm thinking of like Tony Evans recently, and I still don't have any idea what he did, but when you get up and give such a general thing after this beloved pastor built this church, and the people love him, respect him, all over the world, really, and then you give this vague statement, you open the rumor mill. Everybody tries to fill in the blanks that you didn't fill in. So I can't really speak for the other person I was involved with, but I can speak fully for me that I committed adultery. It ruined my ministry, at least partially, and it hurt tons of people. You know, at that time, we were probably 500-600 people at our church, and most of them came after I was there because I ran off all the originals. But so they were loyal to me. They loved me. I just actually met with one of my closer friends, and he said, we have some unfinished business. And he said, I stood up for you during that time because I just didn't believe it. And I lied to everybody at the time because that's just goes with it. I think it's cover your butt mode when it's not public knowledge yet. So I had to apologize to him for lying to him, but I also asked him, what if I would have told you the truth? Now I've shifted this burden from me and my wife, who were the only ones that knew the whole story at the time, because I actually stayed at the church 3.5 years after the affair because everybody thought it was just an emotional affair, which I believe is a lie I've heard a lot since then, because it's easier to deal with than to say, no, it was the real deal. It was emotional and physical. But yeah, I've got to own it. And man, I've done like 10 years of soul searching, trying to figure out how I could get myself in that position. But I've figured it out. So let me back up one other step. I grew
Well,
up in, oh, go ahead.
wait 1 second.
You're the
I
host.
actually want to interject a little bit
Okay.
because I want to tell you a little bit about some things just because of what you said so far, because I was there.
Yep.
And that's, to me, one of the unique aspects is that I was there during this entire process. And so one of the things that I do think is interesting is I'm going to tell you this blankly, that I always felt like you were superficial.
Yep.
Like I never really felt like on a Sunday morning, whenever I would speak to you, I never really felt like, oh yeah, I'm really speaking to the real Scott Ranck, that I'm having an in-depth conversation. You were very
Nobody ever
much a
did.
people person. Yeah,
Nobody
you were
did.
a people person, a stage personality. You were known to be a pretty decent preacher. Like I remember some sermons that you preached from back then, like even today. You preached this one sermon on clearing the debris, and many others. And so yeah, you were a powerful speaker and you're a powerful personality. And it was that case that you always did feel somewhat superficial on that level. And so I was very surprised to hear you say that, yeah, you did feel emotionally shallow.
Yeah, wow, we're really going in the deep end here now, but I've got this theory I hear regularly from church people. Some say I'm going to go look for another church because I can't connect here. And the way I see it, all of us are fallen. None of us had perfect childhoods. In the church traditions I've been in, what you feel, emotion, was always poo-pooed. You know, it was always live by faith, believe the truth, don't let your feelings get in the way. So what happens is we get hurt, we don't know what to do with it, we stuff it down, and we build protective layers. And then when we go to church, all you're doing is bumping into layers. You're never connecting at a deep
Mhm.
level. We have marriages that all they've ever done is bump into images. You know, they got married because they thought the other person was hot and really didn't know a thing about how to connect at a heart level where there's no secrets, all your junk's on the table. And that was me. I didn't know anything about it. I got saved at 21 because of my personality. I wasn't afraid to pray in public. So the church we were in, the next thing you know, I'm like, they make a leader out of you because you're not afraid to talk. So I'm teaching Sunday school, you know, I'm preaching some at the church and then feel called into ministry, go through Bible college, become pastor of a church. Now I'm on the stage and I'm really still the same guy that got saved at 21 because nobody's really helped me dig in, look at all the garbage in my life, how I dealt with rejection or hurt. The way I dealt with it was I always ran to something else. As a teenager, I ran to alcohol, pornography. When I was lonely, didn't know what to do, I would escape. We don't like pain, so I try to kill it. And now I'm a college graduate, put on a stage, pastor of a church, but I'm still dealing with life the same way I did as a teenager.
Yeah.
I really think in his grace, the Lord allowed me just to be crushed. So I would do the hard work of beginning to really have a renewed mind that was willing to say, search me, oh God. There's stuff in me that I don't know about. And if your spirit doesn't reveal it to me, I'm never going to know it. How could I have done this? And that's what my book's about. I mean, just for years, it was like he was just peeling the onion, one layer at a time. And fortunately, in his grace, he stuck me in this. Well, he didn't stick me. He gave me an opportunity in a large church in Florida to start a men's ministry. And the very first night, I stood in front of the 10 guys that came and told them my story. And I said, you guys need to know that I haven't figured it out yet, but I've made a deal with the Lord. Anything you reveal to me, no matter how humbling or painful, I'm going to teach these guys the next week. For 5 years, that's all we did. Every week I had a new peel of the onion of, and the funny thing was it shaped my whole future ministry, because instead of preaching at somebody, I was telling them how God's word was taking me apart. So they're on the edge of their seats because I'm not talking to them. I'm talking about me. And it was like a Trojan horse. The truth of what I shared, they didn't have any defenses up. They're on the edge of their seat. What in the heck's he going to say next? And so it just penetrated right in, and almost inevitably every Monday night after a men's meeting, a guy or two or three or five would come up and say, man, when you were telling on you tonight, that's me. So after I'd talk, we'd get around little tables and have small group. And our pastor came in one time. He would never come, but he came in one night, just opened the door and looked in. And by then we were up to about 40 or 50 men. And he asked me the next Sunday, how do you get those guys to talk? I stuck my head in the door and it sounded like a woman's ministry. I couldn't hardly hear. There was so much chatter. And I said, we've created a safe environment that anything they say, we're just going to use to help them grow.
Now, I want to ask a couple questions because I'm sure they would be in the minds of the listener at this point, and it would be on my mind. Are you saying that this was just, okay, you had an affair and then you got right back into ministry and now everything is fine and there's not really any significant difference?
No.
Because many other people, that's also what they're afraid of, is they're looking at this in a serious way of like, in some of these other circles, these pastors are having affairs and they're back in ministry within 1 to 2 years.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this real quick. So like, you have pastor linked up here. Are you a pastor now, or was that about partly the identity of the past as well?
I'm not a pastor now, although some people call me pastor because I was, and I do preach quite a bit at our church where we are members. Right now, my role, other than speaking every Sunday, I'm probably as busy as I've ever been. I started and oversee small group ministry at our church. It's a small church, 100 to 120 people. Gail and I lead a young couples class Sunday mornings. I have a Monday night men's group, and we have a home group at our house on Wednesday nights. So I prepare 3 times a week to teach. I meet a lot with pastor and other leaders, helping them try to make our church the best it could be. But I really have a problem with somebody, and I know some pastors who had moral failures, just said, "I'm forgiven, bang, I'm starting a new church." That gives me heartburn. I'm not sure right now or since then I would be qualified to be a lead pastor. Everybody's called to do some kind of ministry, so I serve. I don't expect a stage ever, but when I'm given an opportunity, I take it. But I probably had 10 years of healing before I felt like I could do more than I'm doing now.
So now I would like to go back to the beginning and even a little before the beginning.
Yeah.
Because what made this also so unique for me was that it surrounded what I would call the three affairs. So right before you was actually the affair of the youth pastor at our church, Paul.
Yep.
And so I've always really wondered about that. So in a short time span, well, I do. I want to hear this from your perspective because so this is my perspective. In a short span of, I think, nearly 5 years, we had our youth pastor go down to an affair, and that was a huge, huge deal. Huge deal for me. I remember being there.
Huge for
That
me
like the
too.
whole church was bawling, and you were there. So you were the senior pastor. He was the youth pastor, and so he went down to an affair with somebody else who was in the church. And then, yeah, within a few years or several years, I think it's maybe within 5 years.
Probably 8.
Okay, I don't remember it
Yeah.
precisely. But then, yeah, you had your affair. And then the other one that I want to mention was not our church, but it was Faith Alive. If you remember, I don't know if you were probably gone, but the
I know
senior
about
pastor,
it. I know about it.
senior pastor of Faith Alive had
There
an
was
affair
another
as
one
well.
in Suffolk right at the same time.
I don't know about that one.
Liberty.
Oh, really? Okay. All right.
I'm friends
Yeah.
with
All
him
right.
now. So he's done a lot of work and he ended up working at Liberty.
See, I felt like Faith Alive was one of the examples of how it shouldn't have gone because by pure chance, I was at the meeting when the pastor first expressed everything to the congregation. I was just there to pick up a friend, and it happened to be the night that he was there to explain and talk. And he seemed to have zero repentance. He was talking about this is his opening to the congregation.
He was
Hey,
who I was referring to earlier when I said they messed up and then jumped right back in. I'm forgiven.
that
So
was it.
I don't know where he is now or what he's doing. I do know he started a church after that, but I don't know if it ever went anywhere.
Well, and yeah, I want to put it on the hubris, not even of waiting a single year. The day he came out to express it and confess to the church, he was already like, I can't wait to be back in ministry. Like nothing had happened.
I almost wondered if he didn't have any other way to make a living.
I don't know.
I don't know enough about that to really speak to it intelligently. I did think it was too quick. And I do believe back then he and I emailed back and forth a couple of times. And I told him that how in the world, could you do that? Just knowing what I was going through internally, I thought there's no way I'm ready to like jump right back in the saddle. I mean, your spouse has tons of healing to do. Fortunately, we didn't get divorced and our marriage is strong. And we both say, like, we hated the classroom, but wouldn't trade the lessons for anything.
Yeah.
So I kind of look at the New Testament and I see two of the premier leaders in the New Testament, Peter and Paul. The Lord crushed both of them. I almost think it ought to be a requirement for ministry for you to be able to tell a story of how you've been broken. I actually helped interview a few people at our mega church in Florida. And that was my first question. Can you tell me if you've ever been broken and what that looked like? Because I don't think you're ready for the stage until you've been knocked down a notch or two. After the fall, we have this saying, if you spot it, you got it. So it's a great way to do soul searching is whatever I see in somebody else that annoys me to death, it's probably my reflection. So I need to take that and say, what is it about me that bothers me? And I also really exegeted Matthew 7, judge not, lest you be judged. How can you, with this log in your eye, worry about a speck in your brother's eye? So get the log out of your own eye first, and then you will be able to see clearly to help get the speck out of your brother's eye. So once you're broken, you've done the hard work on yourself, the Lord gives you a discernment level that's uncanny. And I went to our pastor in Florida because he was young. It's a big church. And I saw me in him before the fall. And one Sunday I went up and I said, man, Pastor, I love you, but you're a train wreck waiting to happen. He said, what do you mean? I said, I see me in you. I'd like to come and talk to you about it. And I really think our relationship probably kept him from doing anything dumb.
So I want to know, how did you end up having an affair after watching the youth pastor of the church go through one himself?
Yeah, I fully didn't understand at that point in my development how he could have done that. I do remember it was really hard to get any details. And then I remember duplicating that when the elders were grilling me of like, yeah, I'm not telling you anything. It's going to incriminate me. Like I told you, I had all the Billy Graham defenses up, and that's all I thought I needed. Nobody ever told me about 6 to 8 hours a day with somebody in the office next to you who was going to start meeting your emotional needs. So I was being affirmed regularly, just through comments. And are you familiar with the concept of the love tank?
Yes.
So we're making deposits in each other's love tank every day, working together. Until one day, I guess the tank was 3/4 full because you could feel the tension. And it was almost like you wake up one day and it's like puppy love, infatuation. And I was never attracted to her physically. I was attracted to the way she treated me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it really felt good. It was meeting a need in me that I didn't even know I had. And later I read in books and saw whole chapters on the need for affirmation. And when I did go to the rehab joint for broken pastors, one of the things the counselor there taught me about was learning how to affirm yourself in the Lord.
Mm.
In my book, I talk about 3 lies I believed. I'll tell you, when I started really looking inward and saying, Lord, what is wrong with me other than I'm a sinner? I really thought I was going to uncover something. I actually designed a cover for the book originally that was a bullseye, and the target was pure black. Because as I went through the layer after layer, I thought when I finally get to the core of who I am, it's going to be just dark. And so I was totally shocked when I got towards the end of the journey that the Lord showed me, you've been believing the enemy's lies about you for your whole Christian life. If anybody really knew you, you believe, they wouldn't love you. If anybody really knew you, they wouldn't accept you. And if anybody really knew how you think inside, you're definitely not qualified to lead a ministry. So that's what I believed about myself. So I have a line in my book that when everything's riding on everything, man, we're just set up for failure. It's like every rejection I heard was just reaffirming the lie I was already believing. And I didn't know how to affirm myself, in the Lord. So I think I was probably emotionally just battered. And to have somebody tell me, like, geez, how could anybody say anything bad about you? You're like the kindest, gentlest man I've ever met in my life. And I'm like just soaking it up like a dry sponge. So I got really emotionally connected before anything physical happened. So when people tell me they had an emotional affair, unless one was in California and one was in New Jersey, I think they're lying. Because
I definitely understand that sentiment.
I just don't see how when the emotional connection gets that strong, it's not going to turn physical.
So if you had Billy Graham's rules in place, why didn't that save you?
Because you still have to interact with people. I couldn't lock my office doors and never let anybody in. So, the ladies in the next office were sharing work. She did a lot of work for me. Like Gail and I were actually teaching marriage seminars at other churches. And she'd put the books together for me. And then she'd say, like, one of my questions was, how would you rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10? She's putting the book together and she says, so how would you rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10? And I remember saying at the time, 8.5. How about you? She said 2. And then I got in this protective pastoring mode, trying to give her tips to improve her marriage. I don't know. It just got tangled up to where the emotional connection kind of won.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, it was definitely rough because, I was around that time. And so you ended up admitting to an emotional affair and then getting sent on a sabbatical based on that.
Really, 2 weeks of rehab is what I got. Wasn't a sabbatical. So.
Well, yeah.
Well, they did take me out of the pulpit. I couldn't preach for a couple months there.
And that really also sparked a little bit of a war back home because, yeah, people were talking about it. And some sounds like were convinced that you had an affair already at that point. And there was some infighting. And my dad was basically standing up for you as well. You know, he said, he's like, no, Scott said this is all that happened. And so we stuck by that. And, you know, we were there to defend you
You
in
know,
that regard.
let me comment on this a minute. Once we got to the point the 3.5 years were up, and I knew I was going to be leaving. The truth came out. The elders were figuring out what to do with me at that point. Eventually asked me to resign. The people that were the hardest on me, including some elders, were ones who had confided to me stuff in their lives that their spouses didn't know about. And I was sworn to secrecy. I thought I could have got up on my last day and went through the church directory and told what I knew about everybody. And so when people you served with who had watched, I had tons of people say, we don't know what happened to you, but you're different since you came back from that place. And I did have a great encounter with the Lord there. He broke me. I wept, confessed, and I really sensed him say that church is not ready to survive without you. You're going to have to go back and build it not to need you, and I'll let you know when it's time to go. So I knew I wasn't staying long term, but I knew I couldn't run either. And we came back and turned everything into team-based ministry, including the preaching. Jamie and Jason shared the pulpit, raised money and started the new worship center, which I never preached in. It was about done when I left. And I thought, I'd done a lot of work in that 3 years on myself, and I thought I'm done. But when we left and I realized more of what I lost, man, the rug came out. It was devastating.
Did you make ministry your idol?
I think I made me my idol and used ministry to do it.
So
So,
instead, would you say that you made ministry your identity?
yes, that definitely was my identity. When we moved to Florida, and the church graciously, I know this was a war, gave us 4 months severance. We were able to get there, get settled. Right when the severance ran out, I got 2 job offers, one at Home Depot and one at Lowe's. And Lowe's paid more, so I went to Lowe's, put on the little red vest, or maybe it was blue. No, it was red. I felt like a cubby in Awana, if anybody knows what Awana is. And I was 50 and my boss was 32 and didn't know much about leadership. And that was a brutal year of humbling for me, working at Lowe's. But I realized that I had made my identity being the pastor of a growing church. The staff used to joke on me because they could repeat my line. Hi, I'm Scott Ranck. I'm senior pastor of a transitioning church in Chesapeake, Virginia. And Mark and Jamie and Jason would all just. But yeah, my first sermon back after the rehab, I remember Matt Redman's song about worship. It's all about you, Lord. It's all about you. was kind of popular at the time, and the service ended that day with that song being sung and me saying, I started out serving the Lord, but I ended up moving to center stage and the spotlight was on me. And he said I could serve him, but I could only be a stagehand, shining the light on him. And so that transition happened in me shortly after that rehab.
So when you got back to Florida, what happened next in your life? You basically were out of ministry and you were kind of going through a new process that I feel like you just didn't really know what was going on after that. You were just kind of enduring it.
That summer, we left in July, closed on our house October 1st in Florida. So a lot of it was moving, our girls went with us, so they both moved too. Left Timothy behind. That was really difficult. We got down there, and I remember spending the summer just reading the book of Acts, saying, Lord, I don't think the American way of doing church is right. We're setting guys up for failure left and right. No man was meant to lead a church of 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, and all the accolades you get. We're not really designed for that. And you get cocky. Our church was just growing like crazy, and I had other pastors asking me to come and tell them what we're doing because their church wasn't growing. You start kind of getting proud about what's going on inside, taking credit, thinking somehow it's your magic that's doing it all. And I don't think the Lord tolerates that very well. And I almost think it's probably why they're dropping like flies around us. The Lord says, you got too big for your britches. I'm going to take you down a notch here. Then we'll go from there. I don't think he gives up on you. I feel a calling on my life, to follow him, to love him, to serve him, to tell people about him, to teach, to try to help people not do what I did. So right now in our young couples class, we're going through emotionally healthy spirituality.
So during the time of your affair, did you have any close male friends?
Yeah. I talked to, before it became physical, I talked to one of our elders. I'm not going to mention names. Talked to another guy that I could tell anything. You may be able to conjure up who that was. He wouldn't care, Willie.
I don't think so.
Willie, I could tell Willie anything, and he was scared for me. I scoured my library. I mean, I had tons of books on marriage. I'm looking for, what do I do with these feelings and not act on them? I finally found the answer, but it was too late. But I've used it afterwards to counsel other people, and it always makes them mad at me. But I always, if I sniff something going on at church, which I did multiple times, once I went through it, I could see it a mile away. They're getting too friendly. And I'd go right to them and tell them, I see something here. It doesn't look healthy to me. Be careful. I would bring, if they were two married people, I would bring all four into my office. And I'd say, I'm observing some behavior between him and her that I don't like. And I want it to be in the open between all four of you. and it goes away. Once it comes into the light and all four people know, it's over. I've never seen that fail. I did have one guy that I said, your wife and this other guy are really too friendly. Man, he blew a gasket. And he was so mad at me, and he probably could have whooped me. I don't say that about many people, but he might have been able to. But the very next week, he called me. He said, I owe you an apology. She left me for some other guy. And it wasn't the guy at church she was flirting with, but apparently it wasn't the only place she was flirting.
Mm.
But another couple came in after my discernment level went up, and the wife was really concerned. And the guy was kind of doing what I did, trying to blow it off, minimize. I asked the wife to leave the room, go out in the lobby a minute, let me talk to him straight up. And I leaned up and I said, let me tell you what's going on. You're torn between two lovers. And you can't imagine not having either one of them. He started crying and said, how'd you know that? I said, let's just say I've sat in your seat. And they're still together, still believers, actually.
Yeah, that's good. I've actually never heard of that move. So that's really helpful, I think. And I think it's really an area where I'm listening to other young pastors, and some of them who are healthy right now. They're asking this question: how do I avoid the fall? For those, and most of the time, those guys I'm less concerned about, because they're just way more trying to keep those spaces. But I feel like to some degree, almost every pastor has a little bit of an awareness that, okay, it's a possibility, it could be there, but they still think, overall I'm doing okay. What is it that you believe that they're missing when they think they have the intellectual tools? For example, you had the Billy Graham rule, and most are they're looking at that going, that's enough. That'll take care of it.
Here was my thought prior to all this. I got the Billy Graham rules. I felt pretty strong spiritually. I thought if anything ever happened, it would probably be like I was out visiting or somebody came for counseling that was smoking hot, took off their clothes, threw themselves at me. I don't know what I would do. So that was kind of my fear of getting in an environment somewhere where somebody was coming after me physically, is all I thought. Would I be able to resist? I didn't have any awareness of my own emotional needs and voids, that somebody could come just be nice to me and begin meeting those needs, that over time is going to burst something in me that I'm not going to be able to resist.
Yeah.
It's really like an addiction. It's like a drug addict. They've got a need, and they're meeting that need through a drug or alcohol or food or porn or whatever they're doing. This was just a live one. I had emotional needs that weren't being met. Got somebody in the next office I'm spending not 5 hours a day in contact with, but in and out, plenty of time for conversation, we're both regularly building each other up. And a bond forms. And I've said this jokingly, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's strong enough. Your emotions are strong enough that a president of the United States would have sex with an intern in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
It's as strong as any drug. And Gail knows the number of days, but when we actually cut it off, I barely could get off the couch for like 70 days. Over 2 months, I was like in withdrawal. I just couldn't function. And man, that showed me like how powerful this thing is.
Yeah.
So my recommendation is not only have the Billy Graham rules, but be fully aware of either another woman or man, whatever your sex is, at work, wherever, that's in your sphere of daily activity that you find attractive, but worse than attractive is charming to talk to. My formula is if there's some physical attraction, you're not repulsed by the person, but you find them mentally and emotionally engaging. All you need is big blocks of time with that person and you'll have an affair. So if you're married, a wife is a huge gift in this area because they got radar. After I come back from the rehab, I had all the staff make a list of the women in our church that they found attractive, and they sent some kind of vibe from that woman. And every one of us had a list of about 6. And when I come home and told Gail about it, she goes, I'll tell you who they are. She already knew. So the problem is, as humans, is we like that interaction with the opposite sex. But man, it's dangerous.
What did your wife think or feel before the affair? Did she notice anything? Or how did this go unnoticed by your wife? How did this work out?
I think previously our emotional connection was not that strong. But it did get to a point of where I was withdrawing. And no joke, one Sunday morning I was getting ready to preach. I got to church and I checked my email and I had an email from my wife. And she said, there's something going on with you. You're telling me it's just stress, but I know it's not stress. And I think she actually said, cut the crap, mister, and tell me what's going on. So I told her I got too close to another lady at the church. And she said she wasn't coming to church that day. And I was preaching on Moses that day. And the title of the sermon was, How Can God Use Me? And I don't know that I could have preached anything else that day. But I was able to get up and do my job because I felt exactly like Moses. How could you use me? I got to give creds to my wife, though. You know, we've been married, it'll be 52 years in January. And this was 20 years ago, 2000 even. And she has never, ever used that against me as a weapon. We've discussed it. You know, she's asked some questions. That was years ago, not anymore, but and I've talked about it freely from pulpits before thousands of people. First time I got to preach in Florida at the big church, I'd been doing the men's thing for 5 years before he ever asked me to preach. And that was my first sermon since I left Believers. So it was probably like 7 years. Jamie Stewart actually was in the audience that day. He came down to hear me preach. And I thought as I was preparing, all right, Lord, do I go back to 3 points in a poem? Or do I bare my soul? So I told that congregation our story and some of the life lessons. Biggest thing I saw was before when I preached, people come out and shake my hand. Oh, that was a nice sermon, Pastor. After the fall, grown men would come up to me crying. I've had that experience many times now, that the message is like penetrating.
How did your wife respond after she actually heard the full truth? Because you were saying that you actually told her some of this. She realized some of it beforehand.
I'll tell you that story.
Yeah.
I don't know how long your podcast or your thing goes here, but so after I got back from the rehab joint, the counselor there actually told me, don't go back and destroy a church and 2 marriages to clear your conscience. You go back and work at rebuilding your marriage, building your church not to need you. But don't just go up there and puke and tell them everything and destroy everything around you to make you feel better. So Gail and I just started like building our marriage, taking Fridays all day, just doing day trips, having a great time together. So it was probably 8 months we've been doing that when she heard the whole story. And the way that happened, I can see it like it was yesterday. I'm standing in the kitchen eating a sandwich. And she said, babe, I need to ask you something. A lady from the church called today. Her husband's fooling around and she called me for counsel. And she said that other couple got close emotionally first, and then they turned physical also, like I did. And she said it. So when all this went down 8 months ago, did you tell me the whole truth or did you lie to protect me? And I about choked on my sandwich bite in my mouth, but I felt like Pigpen. I had this cloud over me and I knew I got to tell her sooner or later. And that gave me the opportunity. And I said, I lied. I said, I'm not sure it was to protect you. It was to protect me. And we had a really hard 2 weeks after that. And I gave her permission to ask me anything. I said, do me a favor, though. Give me a heads up if you're going to ask me a question, because if you catch me off guard, I'm going to lie to you. I know I will. So she'd give me a warning. Hey, I'm thinking about something I need to know. And she asked me all kinds of really hard questions. And I told her the truth. And at the end of a couple of weeks, I said, babe, honestly, there is like 0 left. So I think now the ball's kind of in your court, whether you want to forgive me and rebuild or call it quits. I feel like biblically you got every right to divorce me. And she said, after she prayed about it and thought about it, she said, after the last 8 months we have had together, I'm not willing to call it quits. So I honestly think if I would have came right back from the rehab, told the church everything, told Gail everything, I'd be divorced and would have got fired that week. Where the way it came out, and I don't tell anybody to lie about this stuff, But I confessed to 2 counselors fully. I confessed to the Lord fully. And I just felt like I had a job to do. I got to make this church not need me. And look at where the church is today, whether you agree with everything that's happened there or not. Jamie, my executive pastor, is still the lead pastor for longer than I was there, 20 years now, I think. Church has grown. They've reached a lot of people. And our marriage is together and stronger than ever. So all I'm going to say is, in our case, it worked out the way it's supposed to, I guess.
For those that are in ministry now and they don't ever want to do this, I feel like a big part of what you've expressed as in your book is not just the physical proximities, because I think that's what most people think about. But how does somebody go about getting the emotional healing to be secure enough to stay focused on Christ and not take their eyes off the ball?
That's great. A great question, and really the great need, I think. I mean, you know the percentages of pastors that are looking at porn?
It's
up
high.
there.
Last I heard, it was high.
It's
Well,
high.
and that's only based on the ones that have confessed.
So what that tells you is there's emotional voids in their life they're trying to fill, and they haven't figured out how to do it in a healthy way. So there's material now with which there wasn't in my day. I would highly recommend read my book, Journey to the Core. It's on Amazon. Peter Scazzaro. Have you ever heard of him? He's a pastor in New York, but he's done the whole emotionally healthy spirituality. He's got books. He's got trainings. I highly recommend his work. It requires lifting the hood and really doing some hard work. Our class right now, our Sunday school class, it's interesting that we don't know what we don't know. We grow up in a home. We absorb how our parents deal with conflict. We absorb how they relate to each other. We absorb how they deal with hurt. And it just becomes our subconscious way of dealing with stuff.
So you have a quote in your book, and this is one of the ones that really stuck with me because I have very much felt this one at some points in my life, and I feel like I see it in others. And it's this one part where you mention, I'm not sure if somebody who hasn't had the experience can intellectually understand what it means, like to experience love.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about this one part where it's that notion of like, yeah, you're hearing God loves me. God loves me. God loves me. Every Sunday you're hearing God loves me. He accepts me. He cares for me. But it's never sinking in to the core of who you are.
That's what broke me. I tell the story in the book, but it's not near as dramatic as I was in my 4th day of counseling at the rehab joint. I had a lot of alone time, and I was a runner back then. So I'd get up early and run on the beach every morning. It was January in Florida, in the Panhandle, and it was kind of chilly. And this day it was windy, and I had a hooded sweatshirt up, and I was dead inside. I hadn't prayed at all. And I was running down the beach, probably about 20 minutes or so into my run. And I don't know what your listeners think about God speaking to you. I didn't hear a voice, but I had the strongest mental impression. I love you, son. And it cut me deeper than I've ever been cut. I could not stop weeping. I was bawling like I imagine Peter when he went out and wept bitterly, it says, after the denial. It was a bitter weeping. I cried for a half an hour. I couldn't get composed. I looked around a couple times to see if anybody was on the beach. Fortunately, there wasn't. But after that, I just had the strongest experience of God's love for me. And I went back to my room, and all I wanted to do was read the Gospels. And I burnt through Matthew in like one sitting, 28 chapters, just couldn't get enough. And I was starting to see stuff that I had never seen before. It was like, I don't know. I've thought on that so many times, like, here I am, Lord, failed you, failed the church, failed my wife, failed my family, failed all these people. I'm at the lowest I've ever been low. And that's the time you choose to reveal your love to me. And it was transformative, still is. I usually can't tell that story without choking up. It's just was powerful. Then after that, I heard Charles Stanley say he was 52. And this is in my book too. First time he ever experienced the love of God, he was 52 years old.
So, this is not a major plug for charismatic churches, but I do feel like there is a sense in which they are connecting what we experience, and that is supposed to be part of our Christian life. And for those that are purely intellectual, they struggle to understand this. But I have encountered more and more believers who have come from some of those conservative churches who are starting to have powerful experiences with God. And it's making all the difference, because they're like, yeah, I knew that before, but I never experienced it. I could hear God in his word saying like, oh, I love you, but it just washes over you as if he never said it. And I really feel for those that do not have any personal relationship with God.
The difference between a dream and a vision is, in a vision from God, you're awake. So I don't know what you think about this, but I believe I've had visions. And the way I believe it was God showing me something was, it was like you interviewing me. I don't know what you're going to say next. Only this is going on in my head. And they're always biblical. And they've all shaped me. And I remember every one of them, where I was when it came. And I think I'd like to close with this story because it's so powerful. I was in Florida now, out of ministry, feeling a little bit distant from God. And I read one of Bill Hybels' books, another guy that took a dive. And I think his was called The Power of the Whisper or something like that. And I read the book, and I went out the next morning for a run, and I said, wow, Lord, it's really been a while since I've felt you teach me something, tell me something. Would you speak to me this morning? And I was staying in West Palm Beach, and right behind my hotel, about 2 blocks, there's a bridge that goes over the intercoastal waterway over to Palm Beach proper, which is some high dollar real estate. But our company served that area. So on the other side of the bridge, it was a running trail. And I was on that running trail, and it's lined with mega mansions. Well, the mansions were on my right, the intercoastal waterways on my left, with docks and yachts. And I'm looking at yachts, matching them to houses, and thinking, wow. And it started in my mind, son, if that were your mansion and your yacht, it wouldn't be enough for you. In time, you'd get bored with it. And I'm pondering that, and I think, well, you're right, Lord, because I know me and I know how I am. And I'm running along, and it was still dark, and I looked to the left, and there was the West Palm Beach skyline, and Trump had a building there. There's Trump's name up on the building. And I look over there, and it was a beautiful sight. And then it starts again. Son, if you own that whole town and you are the most influential businessman over there, and you could walk in any boardroom in any company, and when you walked in the room, everybody would stand up out of respect for you. And the young women would be lined up down the street to have time with you. You could have anything you wanted. It wouldn't be enough for you. And I kept running on. And then pretty soon I got this mental picture of me standing on a stage. And it's kind of like some of the old pictures you saw of Billy Graham overseas somewhere where people were as far as the eye could see. And the Lord said to me, if you could speak to a crowd that big every week, it wouldn't be enough for you. And I said, you know what? After a while, it probably would just be another day at the office. And I kept running along, and it was quiet for a while. And I thought, well, that's it. And in a little ways comes into my mind, you know how I know none of that would be enough for you, son? And I said, no, I really don't know where this is going. You know me, so I guess that's how. And I kept running a little further, and then it comes. The reason I know none of that would be enough for you, son, is I'm the creator of the universe. I've created everything there is. I've made you, and I'm not enough for you. So nothing I made could ever be enough for you. I'm not kidding you. It was like somebody punched me in the gut. I felt like dropping to my knees. And I repented of that. I said, man, Lord, I am sorry. You are everything, and you are everything I need. And if I can live with that truth, then every other good gift you give me will just be icing on the cake. So, man, that story rocked my world. It still does. I've shared it many times, but it is such a powerful truth. And, you know, I don't know how many young pastors out there think they're going to be the next Andy Stanley or the next celebrity pastor. Down deep, I think there's a little bit of that in most of us. You know, we're going to rock the world for Christ and his church. The less of that thinking you have, the better off you'll be.